What up, Tolkien poppers? Happy Tolkien Reading Day. It is Nick here with a recording from the Tolkien session at Theology Beer Camp 2024, where Tripp, Craig, and I talked, and Craig gave an awesome talk there. And guess what? There will be a Tolkien session at Theology Beer Camp 2025, which you can buy tickets for. And this year it is in October, and it is in Minneapolis this year. And so there will be links in the show notes for you to get tickets. There are going to be a lot of creatives, academics there. And, being a Tolkien fan is all about being creative and doing awesome stuff, letting your voice be heard. And in honor of Tolkien Reading Day, I am going to read one of my favorite passages from his essay entitled On Fairy Stories, where he talks about art and its literal effect on the world as we know it. So here you go. Here is Tolkien's words here. So great is the bounty with which he has been treated that he may now perhaps fairly dare to guess that in fantasy he may actually assist in the affiliation and multiple enrichment of creation. So Tolkien is talking about being a fantasy writer there, but it is translatable to all art in my opinion, and to a lot of human endeavor. So go out there, create some stuff, read Tolkien, and contribute to the affiliation and beautification of creation. Cool. So sit back, relax, grab a pint, warm glass of hot tea, and tea comes in mugs and not glasses, but who knows? Maybe you'll do that. But sit back, relax, enjoy this, and happy Tolkien Reading Day. Peace.
Welcome everybody to the Geek Stage Beer Camp 2024. Welcome. This is the Tolkien session where we are lucky enough to have Craig Boyd with us once again, who was with us for last year's Beer Camp, who gave an excellent talk last year and will give us a great talk as well. And if you don't know Craig is a professor of philosophy and humanities at St. Louis University. Among the books he's published are The Virtues, a very short introduction with Kevin Timp, Virtues and Their Vices, also co-edited with Kevin Timp, and A Shared Morality, a narrative defense of natural law ethics. His scholarly articles have appeared in such venues as the Haythrop Journal, Christian Scholars Review, Christianity and Literature, New Blackfriars, and American Catholic Philosophical Quarterly. And he's done a bunch of other awesome stuff related to virtue, ethics, philosophy, and Tolkien, most importantly, maybe. And before we get started, someone found this on the ground, and it's a little envelope, and it says, Mr. Frodo Baggins, urgent, important, confidential, do not delay. So we will not delay any further, and I will give it to Craig Boyd, and if you would give him a round of applause, please.
All right, a couple of disclaimers. I do about one of these a month, and I always get this question at the question and answer time, and it's, what do you think of the Rings of Power? So I'm just going to ask you to resist asking that question, okay? At least don't let it be the first question, okay? I came to Tolkien very early in life, and have been reading them my whole life, but I didn't, went into philosophy, doing ethics, mostly the virtues. And I am particularly interested in how each character has a defining virtue or vice. So they tend to be an exemplar of a particular virtue or an exemplar of a vice, if vices have exemplars, okay? So Gandalf's virtue is going to be wisdom, and we'll talk about that a good deal. But so I got into it through the back door, and people started asking me to do some things on Tolkien, and so I've kind of made it a little cottage industry recently. So also, I have a very conversational style, so if you want to interrupt me, ask me to repeat something, please do. Okay, so this is not a conference where I'm wearing my tie and I'm having to battle people are going to take me on. So I figure that we are, shall we say, a fellowship. And we'll go from there. Have any of you thought about the similarities between Moses and Gandalf? Anyone, raise your hand. Okay. So I thought about this a few months ago. And if you consider it, they're both old men with gray beards. Well, Moses turns white after a while. They both have staffs that can perform the miraculous. Okay? They both wear robes. They take the side of the oppressed and stand up against the oppressors. They love and pursue the good. And maybe most importantly, they wander for quite some time. And Nick pointed out to me this morning that Jesus also wanders for some time. And my response to him was, yeah, but he didn't have a staff, so that's not as cool. And so you've got the elves call Gandalf Mithrander, and who knows what that means? Gray Wanderer. And so he's a wanderer. And so this idea of wandering has come to me to think about it in terms of what does it mean to wander, and to what extent we think people are wandering, and maybe they aren't wandering. And so this might have to do with some of our perspective. So if you look up in the Oxford English Dictionary, wandering means basically traveling. It means to be on the move. And Gandalf is always on the move. But Gandalf's movement is not simply aimless movement. It's always for a purpose. And so with him, we are considering, well, what is his purpose? And this is often unknown to people who are associated with him. So Bilbo and the dwarves and the Hobbit, they're not quite sure where he is when he ducks out on them. So, right before they enter Mirkwood, he basically ditches them. They're thinking, what are we going to do? But the whole Hobbit it's wandering. They have these, all of these side adventures. And so that I found was particularly interesting. But Gandalf is a wizard. And the wizard's mission he says in Unfinished Tales, he says, they were bidden to advise and persuade men and elves to the good, and to seek to unite in love and understanding all those whom Sauron, should he come again, would endeavor to dominate and corrupt. So that was really their vocation, their mission. And so they're there to encourage the peoples of Middle-earth, but it's very important that they are not dominating them, because domination is possibly the worst possible sin as far as Tolkien is concerned. And so if you've ever read any of the letters and his comments about Winston Churchill, he says he has nothing but contempt for Churchill because he sees Churchill as lusting after power. And he uses this phrase, nolo episcopare, which is the medieval notion, the requirement for a bishop. I do not wish to be the bishop. And so that's the qualification, is that you do not desire power. And so there has to be, so in contrast to power, there's care. And I'm going to return to that here in just a little bit. So he moves about, and the wizards are not to stay in one place. They're to move about in Middle-earth, and that's another part of their vocation. So Radagast moves about the forests and so on. Gandalf moves all about the good peoples. He's going down to Gondor. He stops in Rohan. He goes to the Shire. He goes to Rivendell. He's all over the place. But what's the first thing that Saruman does? He goes to Orthanc, this ancient tower, and he takes up residence there. And so he is really violating his vocation. And so if you can contrast those who are on the move. Bilbo is on the move. He becomes this new person. These people are always on the move. Aragorn is on the move. But the people who stagnate are people who stay in one place. And by stagnate, I mean morally stagnate. So Saruman Denethor, and of course Sauron. But Sauron is not really a character you get to know. He's really at least not in Lord of the Rings. Now, there are a few exceptions to those who aren't traveling a whole lot, like Elrond doesn't move around a lot either, but he has in the past. So he's got street cred when it comes to wandering, okay? Same is true of Tom Bombadil. But the wizards are Maiar, angelic beings who become incarnated, and so they're subject to all human infirmities, and they can die. And we see that. Of course, the death of, by the way, I hope this isn't a giveaway, but Saruman dies. But his death is a really weird one, and you wonder, what exactly happened to him, So the Maiar are these beings that are powerful, but they're not meant to use their power in ways that are dominating, which I find fascinating. But we first meet Gandalf in The Hobbit, and what is the subtitle of The Hobbit? They're backing in, or an unexpected what? Journey. Okay, so now we've got wandering and we've got the journey, and so we first meet him there, and he's looking for someone to go. Gandalf is looking for someone to go on an adventure, and he knows that the adventure, the journey, will turn Bilbo into a different person. And if he had stayed there, he would probably have turned out like the Sackville Bagginses, and maybe he's afraid of that. Maybe Gandalf is afraid that he's going to turn into them. So, but we see that he goes along with them for some of the journey. Sometimes he's not, but there's this, he's more of a kindly, eccentric wizard. But we get greater development of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and he's not merely the entertaining old man who produces fireworks, for Bilbo's 111st birthday. He's not just doing that. He is this, as we come to find out in the subsequent chapters, that he's been studying the ring lore, and he is knowledgeable, but not just knowledgeable, but wise. I'll return to that shortly, too. But he's a companion and a guide for Frodo and Sam on their journey and the Fellowship themselves. And he has care for those who are on the journey. And you can contrast that with Saruman. And in Unfinished Tales, Tolkien writes that Saruman, whose mind was in contrast to Gandalf's, always more attracted by artifacts and instruments of power than by persons. And so Gandalf has this capacity to see all creatures, sentient creatures, as persons. And he has care for his friends. He has care for all of the Fellowship. And you see this in an exemplary way at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, where he gives his life for his friends. And that is caring for his friends. But it's also interesting that he cares for his enemies. He cares for Gollum. In fact, he cares so much for Gollum that he urges Frodo to practice compassion on Gollum. And of course, that leads to why the Fellowship's task is ultimately successful, even though Frodo is not successful. But Frodo is successful in practicing this compassion. But he also has compassion for Saruman, his enemy, the one who imprisoned him, this one who was a traitor, to the cause. And so he has care for persons. And I'm going to return to this notion of care in more depth in a little bit. But I want to talk about, what I would say is that care is tightly connected to wisdom. And of course, wisdom sounds like wizard, which sounds like wise. And so wizard comes from this Old English word, wis, which means wise. And do any of you know what the feminine version Witch, yes. So witches and wizards were not what we see roaming about our neighborhoods in a week or so, in a couple of weeks, But they were people who had certain kinds of wisdom. And it wasn't mere knowledge. Wisdom is not mere knowledge. So Saruman has knowledge. He has a great deal of knowledge. In fact, he has, in some regards, too much knowledge. One of his besetting vices is curiositas, which is the desire to know things beyond your capacity to know, because it will corrupt you or it will destroy you somehow, and you are not strong enough to sustain it. So Saruman has knowledge, but he does not have a love for the good. And I think this idea of wisdom then is a love of the good that is primarily understood as a care for persons, where we act in ways that contribute to their flourishing. I'll say that again. I think wisdom is a love of the good, primarily understood as a care for persons where we act in ways that contribute to their flourishing. Gandalf is interested in seeing everyone flourish. So the Jesuits have a term called cura personalis, which means care for the whole person. And of course, cura is also where you get the word cure. So curing and caring are, again, closely related. And cura personalis is care for the whole person, not just a person as an acquaintance, a business partner, someone you're engaging in an exchange with transactionally. It's care for the person as a person. So I might care for a particular baseball player, not because I care about him as a person, but I care about him hitting over 300. Okay, so those are different kinds of care. And so this idea of cura personalis, I think, could be understood in terms of two of the virtues. And the first one is prudence, and I would call it prudence plus charity. Now, prudence is this virtue, Thomas Aquinas says, is recta ratio octabilium. And what that translates to in English is right reasoning about things to be done. So Gandalf is very good at reasoning rightly about doing things. And so he is, at the Council of Elrond, he's the one who is offering the wisdom here. You're also at, right before the battle at the Black Gate, he's using his knowledge and wisdom because he gets it. He understands how Sauron thinks. Now, this idea of right reasoning is kind of problematic because we have this idea of reasoning in kind of a post-Enlightenment world, where we think, reason is logic. It's what analytic philosophers do. And that's not at all what Aquinas means. Aquinas means something along the lines of right relationships, about how you relate to others. And it's always right to care for others. And that's one of the important things about the virtue of prudence. You are deliberating well, and you're thinking well, and you're deciding well on behalf of thinking about these relationships, in light of these relationships that you have with others. So we all have different relationships with different people, and it's important that we don't treat everyone exactly the same way. I don't treat my children the way I treat my friends, the way I treat my spouse, and so on. We don't do that because we understand that there are different relationships at work there, right? And so a wise person has that. So there's a certain intellectual ability that understands these relationships. But there's also charity, I think, and that's part of the care. So you're not only thinking, when you're caring for people, you're not only thinking about what's good for them, you love them. You actually care for them. So, with Aquinas, he says that charity is friendship with God. Of course, in Lord of the Rings, God really doesn't show up there. God is there in, Eru Ilúvatar is in Silmarillion, but not in Lord of the Rings. So what you could say is that charity, at least here, is friendship with the good. And it's an intimate friendship with the good because you love the good. And the good orients all of your activities. And that's really kind of the fundamental difference. At least Augustine says this, when he talks about members of the city of God and the city of man, his language. The city of God is defined by all those who love God, and love the good. But the human city is by those who love themselves. And clearly that's Saruman is a member of the human city, and Gandalf is a member of the city of God, if you will. So, cura personalis means caring for persons who are on the journey. And being on the journey assumes another virtue. And if you were with me last year, I talked about the virtue of hope. I'm gonna augment that a little bit this year. So, the virtue of hope is the virtue of being on the way. So, a person who has hope has not arrived, but they're somewhere along the way on that journey. And it could be that they're wandering about on the journey, and they're not sure where they are, and they're not sure the right direction. And so the technical definition of hope for Aquinas is hope is the patient expectation of a difficult but possible future good. It's a patient expectation of a difficult but possible future good. So you have not achieved it. It's in the future, and it's possible, and you are expecting it. And what's interesting about that word expecting it is, you know what an expectorant is? It's something that comes out of your chest. That's what it does. It's literally, because that's where your pecs are, and that is an emotion. In the medieval world, that's where your emotions are located. So having this expectation is an emotional commitment. And of course, for the virtue, it becomes a commitment of the will towards God. And of course, the virtue of hope in the Christian tradition is that patient expectation of the difficult but possible future good, which is full communion with God. You can have communion with God now because God's helping you along the way, along the journey, and you don't hope by yourself. You can despair by yourself, and sometimes you can despair with others, but you don't hope by yourself because others help you hope when you cannot hope. So you think about times of grief that you've had. Others surround you with hope and with love. Now, Joseph Pieper, the 20th century philosopher, talks a lot about this, and he says there are two ways we can consider hope and its opposites. And he says the person who has hope is on the journey, they're on the move, if you will, and they're continuing to move, and he calls that the status viatoris. So a viator is someone, it's where we get the word aviator, someone who is flying and who is moving, the person in the plane is moving along. The status, he contrasts that with the status comprehensoris, which is a person who is stuck. They either think that they cannot move or they think they have already arrived. And so the person who thinks they've already arrived is proud. And they haven't. And the person who is stuck is the person who has despair. And so Gandalf, with his care for others, is helping people move along. He's helping them move along on the journey. So you could see that hope could be defined as the virtue of movement, if you will. And you might consider this. Think about two kinds of water. In fact, I think it's in the Didache. They talk about living water, which is moving water, rivers. So a river does not stagnate, but a pond does. So you think about the stagnation of the pond, and that is really the kind of problem that a person who is in despair or the proud person is, or the river, and that's the person, the river is on a journey. That water is moving. The Mississippi River is always moving. It's on a journey all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Okay? And so that's an interesting way of thinking about that movement. And the river sometimes looks like it's wandering. Okay? But the thing is, when it comes to persons, you are typically wandering with people that care for you. And so the wandering may or may not be seen as something with a purpose. It might seem as aimless, it might not. But Gandalf's movement is always motivated by care for persons. Whether it's Pippin, he cares deeply for Pippin, and maybe calling him fool of a took frequently is a way of it. Maybe we call that tough love, okay? That's the tough version of Cruel Personalis. But it's really fascinating when Pippin gets tempted by the Palantir. What does Gandalf do? He tends to Pippin, and he cares for him so much that the White Rider takes him to Gondor to be safe. He takes the least of these, his brethren, and he takes him to a place where he will be as safe as he could be during these times. So he cares for Pippin, and then Pippin asks Gandalf, "Gandalf, is there any hope for Frodo?" And Gandalf's response is, "Only a fool's hope, or so I'm told." And because, Denethor had been calling him a fool repeatedly, okay, if you remember that passage. But Gandalf is providing him with hope. He is there along the journey, and they weren't expecting to go, to Minas Tirith. Might have seemed like they were wandering, but it wasn't, because he had a purpose there. He cared for Gollum. He wanted Gollum. He thought that there was hope for Gollum. He cared for Frodo and Saruman and Theoden. So all of his actions, all of his movements about Middle-earth are designed with care in mind. And so from the outside, Mithrandir, the Grey Wanderer, or even Gandalf the White Rider, from the outside, there may not seem to be rhyme or reason to his travels, but understanding how these virtues motivate his actions from within provides a kind of coherent itinerary to his travels. So, thank you.
All right. Will Rose, who is one of the systematic geekology people down here, he also hosted beer camp at his church 2 years ago. And it is really hard to end this session with a toast to Gandalf if people don't have beverages. So I creatively exegeted the rules. So if we could just take and pass. This is not actually beer distribution. This is sacramental enabling. It's going down. Also, the Tolkien session is my favorite session for two reasons. One, I know I get to hang out with them, but also, if I screw up in a theology or philosophy conversation, they're like, "You're still paying off your student loans. Why did you do that? You failed." But if I say something dumb in a Tolkien session, it's just like, he's just like me. He didn't have a degree in this. When he gets sick, he rewatches the extended version of the trilogies, and he reads all of the books out to his family on a consistent basis and hopes to coerce his kids, even if they aren't into Jesus, to be like, Father Christmas is still cool. He talks to a fucking polar bear. Tolkien's Christmas letters, geez, clearly y'all have not been fully indoctrinated into how to make your kids a Tolkien fundamentalist. Because, if you're going to pick one, may as well be one that was not, hasn't been leveraged towards some really ugly stuff. One of my favorite passages that we may have been on the internet and discussed when inebriated, Craig. Which, if anyone has joined our Tolkien live streams, there's like an hour of them if you're there live that never ends up on the internet because I just cry. All right. True story. But Gandalf, talking about the contrast with Saruman, says, "He that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." He that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom. I'll just say, as a professional in philosophy of science and religion, Modernity thought we get at things by being able to quantify them, to know them precisely in that which can be objectified and created, like understood in a quantitative way. And this is a qualitative wisdom. But, we have a philosopher that thought way more about this. So that's my setup why I go turn on these other two microphones.
Okay. Do you really want me to go to the methodological reductionism and ontological reductionism here? Do you want me to go there? No, I don't think you do. I don't think you do. I mean, how many of you know the difference between those? Okay, yeah, I'm not gonna bore you with that. I think that idea is. I think that intuition is right, and I think it is because the modernist era is one that wants to reduce everything into a very simplistic way of thinking. So let's explain away anything that we cannot understand. I don't know if any of you saw, kind of going a little bit tangent here. There's a story a couple of weeks ago on NPR about near-death experiences or post-death experiences. I don't know if any of you heard this. It was fascinating. It was an atheist who was non-reductive. So he's saying, there's something that goes on after death. I can't explain it, but people who say, it's nothing but your brain doing its last thing, he says that's wrong, and I can tell you why it's wrong. And I was just kind of stunned by that. And I sent this out to a bunch of my friends saying, you've got to watch this, or you got to listen to this. So, but back to this idea of, if you're breaking something, you're fundamentally not caring for it. You're destroying it, and I think that's kind of the symptom of there's a cluster not only of virtues, where I'm talking about Gandalf. So you've got hope, you've got charity, you've got prudence, all of this wrapped up in career personalities, right? So there's a cluster of these virtues. I would also contend that vices come in clusters. Okay, so there's a vice of curiositas that Saruman has, the vice of pride. I mean, that's what leads him to this. He thinks, I can handle looking into the Palantir because I'm just as powerful as Sauron. I can go mano a mano with Sauron, and he can't. And then you also have this lack of compassion, this envy. He's consumed with envy for Gandalf as well, because Gandalf gets the ring Narya from Círdan. And at first he doesn't know about it, but then he finds out about it, and he is just envious. He's envious of Gandalf's, it's called status envy, that Gandalf has the status with the elves that he doesn't have, but he also has object envy. He wants the ring. He wants that ring. And he wants the ring too. So in some ways, he's no better than Gollum. He has, his ambitions are more than Gollum's in the sense that he doesn't just want fish every day. That's the ideal world for, that's nirvana for Gollum. But yeah, that'd be how I look at that. So
related to that, and just thinking about breaking things in modernity to know them. And I'm thinking about Catherine Keller and Elia Delia talking about when God, or Elia specifically talks about in the Psalms, where in the womb, he knew you, and how knowing isn't, I'm going to know how many hairs on your head, or when you're going to die, if you're going to live to 99 or 108, but literally knowing you in relationship and being involved. And I think about Gandalf as, in contrast to Saruman, and how Saruman and Sauron and Smaug and how they're related, how they are obsessed with material things and knowledge. And even Saruman believes that he's doing something for the good of Middle Earth, where he convinces himself for that with the knowledge. So I guess more of exploring this idea of like when Gandalf, as embodying true wisdom, going on adventure, calling those to adventure, and those who properly respond to it, like what does that mean to the person you're caring for, the road that you're walking on, the good that you're pursuing, rather than knowing it as data, knowledge.
Yeah, that word knowing is an equivocal term. We can use it in different ways, So, there's knowing that, and there's knowing who. or knowing whom. And so I'd look at it that way in terms of, you can know that, eating arsenic is not good for you. That's knowing that. But it's wisdom to know that it's, that you're not going to eat it. It's to resist that kind of thing. So I think some of the biblical notions of knowing are closely tied and sometimes used interchangeably with wisdom, So that's where I'd go with that.
So Gandalf, Saruman, they have a shared vocation. It gets employed differently. One of the biggest debates within the early church and also within the time of Jesus' arrival is the Messiah. What is the vocation of the Messiah? James McGrath, is he in the room or not? Maybe. Oh, he was in here earlier. All right. His son he wrote a book actually talking about how in that historical time period, there's like a constellation of 7 different visions of the Messiah's vocation. And understanding what it was for Jesus to be the Messiah, you get to see what that's like in the temptations. Like, are you the Messiah who jumps off the top of the temple and Silver Surfer your way down, and everyone's like, well, shit, he just flew down, clearly rocking out for Team JC. JC must be like the one of God. Or like, you just turn rocks into bread, fix the food problem, you're in charge. Or Satan's like, come on, if you just like tap your knee to the ground and bow to me for just a split second, I'll make you in charge instead of Caesar. Come on, you're you're literally the son of God. Come on, you'll be like the greatest Caesar of all time, right? And those rejections of those temptations are a revelation of what his vocation is. And when you think of the vocation that Gandalf does, unlike Saruman, possibly the Blue Wizards, depending on which way they work, or Radagast, who I think was like the equivalent of the wizard who went to Haight Ashbury but never came back. Could you kind of like unpack what kind of wisdom is there? Because you talked about it's a wisdom that looks for flourishing among the kind of like web of relations, and it involves a kind of empowerment, right? Like there are limitations on even what power looks like for Gandalf that he does well, that Saruman resists directly, depending on the Blue Wizard version, is there. And I think that says something about how Tolkien envisions ultimate reality, that the ones who bring the wisdom of Eru Ilúvatar and come alongside are not the interventionist big power that solves the problem, but it's the one that is mostly known for helping you throw really cool parties for a while, that observes hobbits and their particular tookishness that helps on the right day. Like there's something about the way Gandalf does the vocation as opposed to the other 4 wizards that is revelatory of what the divine looks like. And as 3 open relational theologians on the stage might have desires for Eru Ilúvatar not to be classically theist. So anyway, this is what I was thinking about based on our conversation last time and what you just said.
Yeah, that's. I think the fundamental thing is the rejection of raw power. So when he's offered the ring, he rejects it. He's this person who is not going. When he engages Saruman, he gives Saruman every opportunity. So he's engaged. I've got an essay coming out on Saruman and Gandalf and their rhetorical agon, their contests. And how they respond differently. And I use Augustine's book 4 of De Doctrina Christiana. So I use that as the lens through which I analyze this. And what Gandalf is doing, he's opening his hands. He's unclenching his fists. And the more Gandalf unclenches his fists, the more tightly Saruman hangs on to his. And finally, it gets to the point where, when Gandalf says, Saruman, your staff is broken, is he breaking the staff, or is it that the staff is broken of its own, not of its own will, but because this is what's going to happen? So he's not necessarily commanding it. He's describing this is what's happening because you've done this. And so I kind of think about Gandalf as a parent. There's the parent who insists that the child go into a career that the parent insists on, and that's that domination. And then there's the parent who says, hey, find your way. I will help you, whatever you need to do, and I will support you. And so, in flourishing is not ever accomplished by domination. And, if you will, even Eru Iluvatar, I think, often acts by persuasion. So when Melkor starts singing his song, which is discordant, Eru Iluvatar weaves it back into the song. So he's adaptive. So Eru Iluvatar is adaptive to this. And so there are elements in Tolkien of I know a number of Reformed theologians who think that, no, there's this, it's like Tolkien's a Presbyterian. There's no way in the world Tolkien's a Presbyterian. That's just foolishness. But somehow they want to co-opt a Catholic thinker for their own devices. So, but anyway, that's a long answer.
I just have to say Calvinists have been co-opting really cool Christian thinkers of the rest of the church for their own agenda for a while.
Really?
So I have two questions, actually, and they're follow-ups to things that you guys have said. So you said Gandalf gives hope, and then you talked about his ring, Narya, and I had just written this down as you started speaking about it, but his ring inspires others to resist tyranny, domination, and despair. And then you also commented earlier that Maiar shouldn't use their power for domination. So how much of Gandalf is him, or his being as a Maiar, and how much of it is his ring? And then my other follow-up is about the breaking things is not caring for them. So Gandalf knows the sacrifice it will cost Frodo to destroy the ring. He cares for him by leading the Fellowship, by guiding him in that way, but is he choosing the greater good over Frodo's good? Like you just said, flourishing, is that what's best for Frodo?
Oh my God, those are both amazing questions. The second one's even better, so Craig's going to think about an answer that makes him... You looked eager. It's rare. Having talked about Tolkien with Nick for a while, I normally think I have to vamp for a while before he processes his... in untold stories, blah, 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 blah. You go ahead first.
Yeah, I love the question about what is Narya and what is Gandalf. And so what happens with the nature of the rings is that when the rings are created, okay, and the elven rings specifically are created without Sauron being involved. So that's one of the things too. So even the rings with men and dwarves, one of the similar qualities that the elven rings have is that the rings prop up. What's the word I'm looking for? They amplify. Thank you. They amplify your current abilities, and so what they do is that they don't. Obviously the One Ring makes some of its wearers invisible and makes them more domineering, right? Sort of things. But with the One Ring, Frodo couldn't wear the One Ring and dominate someone like Aragorn or Gandalf, right? Frodo wears the ring and he dominates Gollum because they're kind of on this similar level, okay? And so Narya comes in, and those qualities that Gandalf has, that Iluvatar has instilled in Gandalf's being and other Maiars in the Istar, the Istari, the wizards, is that that's inherent. So Gandalf is already going to bolster people, use his power to organize others to use their powers for the good, protect, and Narya comes along and just times that by whatever amplifier that is. And so I would say it's Gandalf inherently, but the ring is there to extend that further. So it's almost a both and, but mostly Gandalf, and it's augmented by the ring. Yeah.
Okay, now I have an even better answer than I would have if I'd vamped. So here's the amplification bit is like so important, but do you know what amplification means? That when you look at the person where your gift is amplification, it involves a recognition of potential they may not yet know. And amplification, I just say, like, if you watch what Gandalf does in the text, a lot of it is amplification that is connected to his vocation right, that Craig's talked about. It's connected to the function of that particular ring. Now, pause for a second and think why someone like Tolkien, who is a very close reader of the story of Jesus, would think both that the humble and the overlooked, the hobbits, would be the undoing of power, and that the gift the divine brings is amplification. It is the recognition that despite the stories that inscribe our lives, there is more potential going on in us than we admit to tell ourselves. So maybe he shows up and goes, but that Tookish side, are you interested in adventure? Or maybe you feel thrown in a place where you wish you could be before where you were or after where you were, and he goes, why are you freaking out like you are somehow in charge of where you're born in the world? But you know what you get to do? You, a finite being, get to decide what you do with your finitude. And Frodo, you get to too. And don't be too quick to extend judgment. And then you say all that and go, well, what do you mean? Maybe if ultimate reality took up sandals and was walking around, do you think he might actually feel like I can't even do my job without calling 12 together? That I couldn't actually empower them with the Spirit to go do the very same verbs that I'm doing? And then they come back and are like, that didn't work out well. He said, let me try it with 70. That's called the Gospel of Luke. Or in the Gospel of John that says, you think I'm doing some really cool shit. I'm about to die and stuff, but don't worry. The Holy Ghost is going to come up alongside of you. It might even amplify you, and you're going to do greater things than me. But so there's this kind of vision of power that Craig raised that you see in Gandalf, both in the ring and his vocation, is looking at us, thrown in the world where we didn't pick, and yet the divine, Eru Iluvatar says, you have all you need to join the chorus of creation that is reconciling all things. Let me amplify it. Let me name your blessedness. And let me tell you that all the stories you say about yourselves that you are not worthy, there's going to be like two little 4-foot hairy-footed guys drink some int wash and then take out the Witch King of Angmar. So just shut up. Right? And so like once you like start to recognize that, the idea that story gets rendered into some justification of some top-down omnipotent deity is wild. Gandalf does so much of what Jesus refuses to be Christ without his disciples, and God refuses to be God without us, not because God is weak, limited, and some like wussy. It's precisely that the most beautiful and powerful thing is getting people to participate in the very redemption of all things, because God knows the potential that each of us have in our own place, our own context. And so what does the Spirit do? It brings the ring. It brings the fire. And when it goes well, it's like Faramar in the books. And I'm still bitter about how he got treated in the movie. But if everyone's familiar with the books, Faramar is what someone who inherited their tradition and learned to read it, where the affirmation of potential was native to them. And anyway, that's a long excursus, but go ahead.
The first question. I kind of thought about it. Is Gandalf a utilitarian? Is he using Frodo? I think there are a couple things you have to consider here. One is he agrees to take the ring at the Council of Elrond, and he knows that it has corrupting power. So he's not going into it unaware, because he's seen what it has done to Bilbo. You know, when Bilbo, and that's one of the best scenes in the movie, where Bilbo, he sees the ring and he gets free, he turns into the Gollum-like creature. That's kind of, but so Bilbo knows what it does. So when Bilbo volunteers, he's aware that it's going to take its toll, because he's seen it take its toll. I don't think he anticipates the severity of it. But he's also been injured by the Morgul blade, and that injury never goes away. It never does. But there's also, there's the eucatastrophe. There are many eucatastrophes in Lord of the Rings. There's one after another in some regards. But at the very end, he does get healing when he goes across the sea. So there is a what you might call an almost eschatological healing, if you will. And so I think those were two things that I think I would navigate. Did you want to follow up on that?
So you said that for the good of, and I have it written down, but for the good, it had to do with relationships. And so after the ring is destroyed, Frodo goes back to the Shire. He falls into this kind of PTSD, depression state, and ends up going to the Grey Havens not very long after that. And so how's that for his greater good if he's then out of relationship?
Well, you can only have the greater good, so in the Catholic tradition, the bonum commune is such that you can never have an individual good at the expense of anyone else. So everyone contributes to the common good, but it doesn't mean that everyone is going to get the, equal shares out of the common good. So there's that's going on, but he is contributing to the common good, and he loves the Shire, and he loves his friends, but he realizes that it's, the healing cannot take place here and now. And so I think that's for me, that's the best way to navigate that in terms of, Frodo was committed to the common good, and that's why he took it on. And sometimes you're committed to the common good, like Theoden, and he dies. So I hope that wasn't a spoiler.
Okay, so we're going to do our toast, so everyone grab your drink. You don't have to stand up quite yet, because this is really based on one of the questions about, home. Why is the desire for home and being on the move always at the heart of Tolkien? And there are two parts of this. One, how many of you have that moment, and this is one of the few things in the Hobbit movies that are good, is when Bilbo realizes that the dwarfs just want a home, and he has one, right? And hobbits having a home are everything that animates the undoing of Sauron's power, right? And so what does he do is he joins the others' adventure that now is the story that he can't tell himself without, right? So there's a kind of solidarity for those of us that have a place to go home to, where you understand your home anew precisely by having solidarity with those that don't have a home in this world. And then there's another element. Frodo. What does Frodo do? Frodo has this whole story for saving the Shire, but he never gets to go home. And so he's Moses. Look at that callback. And so he sits there at the end, at the Grey Havens chapter, which basically I know some of you don't read it every year, and I'm preemptively about to talk myself into not crying. But Frodo is sitting there with his buddies, and they realize he's leaving because he can't go home. And so there are a lot of us who may have trauma and pain and hurt. Maybe you were in a context where a Morgul blade touched a part of you, and your story will never find wholeness, even though your best friend, who journeyed with you all the way to freaking Mordor, can go home. And Frodo does something that is so hard for us to do. He tells the other person who's clinging to the past a future he gets to walk into that they can't. And so he turns to Sam and gives this promissory invitation to going to his home, to having children, to naming them flowers, which if you're a Tolkien nerd, you know exactly what's going on, and that you get to be a dad and you get to go home and you get to love your partner and you get all of that, and I don't get to do it with you. And so part of this gift of death is this orientation of our finitude, where there are these two modes at work. One is that one of the greatest things you can do with your finitude is have solidarity with people without a place to place their feet. Like Bilbo, who got caught up in some dwarves that were destroyed by Smaug, and he stayed faithful to them even though they got intoxicated by their king in an ideology of possession and extraction. And what does the king do at the end? Looks at Bilbo and says, maybe we could all be a little bit more hobbitish. And then Frodo, whose trauma and pain means he does not ever get to go home, looks to his closest and dearest friend and says, you get to say yes to life in ways I can't. And both of those dynamisms are in there. The dynamism of home and adventure is not the possession of a house, the possession of a land, the possession of power, or the possession of some substance. It's the recognition that the greatest gift your finitude gets are people that know your name, know your face, and give a shit. And some of them, in the right circumstances, sit in Mordor carrying around some fucking dirt an elf gave him and some salt on the rare occasion a coney shows up. Because he's walking knowing that there are people he may never see again that matter. But then there's Frodo, whose burdens and pain he can't bear alone, and he is able to walk that step precisely because his friend talks to him. And his friend keeps reminding him that our story that seems like it's ending in destruction is actually a part of a story we were told when we were kids and we treated like fiction and fables. And so when I think of this moment at a place, like we said at the beginning, that we are at a time like Bonhoeffer, we don't know where to plant our feet, I think this dynamism of this dynamism of adventure and home is true. For some of us, we need to figure out, like if we're going to take a step, let's take the step in solidarity for people who've never found at home in the world. And for others of us, we look to a friend because we've never been at home in the world, and yet the way they exercise their privilege is deep solidarity with us. And then when we think about the hope, it's the hope that you see in the chapter of the Grey Havens. It's one that Tolkien kept extending because he lived a life with the loss of his deepest friends that inspired the entire story who died in World War I. It's one where that, if you just read the different versions of the Grey Haven chapter, there's an invitation to that. We have a long conversation of it, and some people are like, that's very homoerotic, and then others are like, maybe it's because Tolkien realized men can have a deep love and affection and be moved by each other, and our culture is cut off men from deep friendship. So that's one element. But the other side, what happens in all of Tolkien's ongoing reflections about the Grey Havens, where you go? All the stories he adds are about friends who should never get to tell their story together being reconnected. Whether it's Sam and Frodo a long time from now, and you get to imagine, oh, Jesus. You get to imagine Frodo sitting down with Sam after years and saying, you want to know what I named her? Or Gimli and Legolas showing back up, where everything about the story, their own traditions told them they shouldn't be friends, and yet they get to sit together. When we talk about death on the other side of death as Christians, we tell a story where the crescendo of our gospel is not just God as love, but the incarnation saying, I no longer call you servants, but friends. And so going to the question of hope, and going to the legendarium of Tolkien, and going to the wisdom of Gandalf that talked Elrond in the Council of chapter, into trusting the friendship when Merry and Pippin show up and junk. It's that the most powerful force in the world are friends who refuse to tell their story without each other. And sometimes that demands solidarity when they don't have a home to go to. And other times people of privilege forsake the ability to have a home because the world should give those that don't have a home a future. And that is both the invitation of Eru Ilúvatar, it's what we mean when we say he's risen indeed, and it's intimately personal. And so each of us have someone who has passed. We can't tell our story without. And those individuals completely have shaped us, and yet every person you ever love and know, you have to tell them their story for them to ultimately know you. And Tolkien created a legendarium where the details of friendship are what's required to understand how the one who sang creation into existence gets God's self done. And so I want you to hold in your mind the friend that none of us could meet anymore, that the only way we meet them is when we've gotten close enough to hear that story, and know that the invitation of the gospel and what Tolkien's describing is one where that story is the one you share when you become most human. And that resonates with a God who we can only describe by telling the story when God took up sandals and flesh and a cross and chose to be a God who could not tell God's story without each one of us, and the friend we can't tell our story without. And so for Eru Iluvatar, who gave us a gift of friendship, and each of the friends who shape our story, let us say thank you. Thank you. Amen. There's a lot of food trucks and junk, and then we're going to smoke cigars and hang out. And if you're cool and you met somebody who's Tolkiening it up and you're hanging out around outside, maybe you tell the story of the friend you're thinking of.